Hello and welcome to another episode of Leaders of Transformation. Today we're going to talk about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, which is generosity. And this is something that I have been learning how to be more generous and also expanding my the ways that I'm generous and just seeing the power of generosity in my own life. And so I'm just really excited to have Troy Bussmeir here with us. He is the CEO of Generous Giving, which is an organization that teaches about generous giving, and he'll talk more about that. Quick shout out, by the way, to Evan Money for making the introduction. I actually learned about generous giving a number of years ago when I was living in LA, and Evan invited me to a gathering that was facilitated by someone from the team on generous giving. And so just really fascinated by what they were doing. And so Evan just recently reached out to me and said, hey, Troy is the new CEO. And so I encouraged you to have him on your show. And after having a conversation with Troy, we absolutely knew that it was time to do this. And so I'm just really excited to have him here. Welcome to Leaders of Transformation, Troy.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you here. And I know you're in your first 100 days, just over 100 days.
100 days, yeah.
Yeah, and so that is a busy time for a CEO coming into an organization. And so I just appreciate you spending a little bit of time here. For our listeners, a little bit more background on you. Just tell us, how did you get to be the CEO of Generous Giving? What was your background leading up to this?
Yeah, so I was a banker for 20 plus years and kind of climbed the ranks ultimately from, credit analyst trainee, cutting my teeth, learning everything that I could. And ultimately the last 5 years spent in the CEO seat of about a $2 billion regional bank here and learned a ton and actually had an interaction with Gigi along the way. So during that career path, had a good friend of mine in Austin started asking me some interesting questions about sort of my relationship with money and my heart and God. And, started asking me questions like, hey, so your next raise, is that going to be for you to raise your standard of living or raise your standard of giving and generosity? I'm kind of like, wait a minute, I've got 4 kids, I've got college to pay, I don't know that I'll ever have enough money and income. And he kept pressing on me things like, well, that's a pretty typical response because of what the world teaches us about money and career and climbing the ladder and what we need, what we deserve. And he said, but I'd like to challenge you with sort of what is God's view of money and stewardship, and really what would it be like to live in response to the generosity that I've received from God, and how would that play out? And I just remember kind of compartmentalizing that as I was climbing the corporate ladder. I'm like, wait a minute, playing this pretty strong comparison game with other people. And it really, after leaving the bank and having some of that really continue to saturate my mind, he invited me to join because he realized that those early messages had transformed my heart quite a bit and changed the way my wife and I looked at accumulation versus being generous, and not just with money and things, but with our time, with our investment in the community around us. And so I was delighted to join really the organization back in the first part of the year, this year, January, and to really be more of an engagement team member and try to help spread the message of what we do to our audience up here in the North Texas area. And they were in the middle of a CEO search, and I thought that was going to happen. And ultimately the candidates they had, it didn't work out, and they reopened it up, and I was recommended to go ahead and apply. And a lot of my prior experience lined up with what they were looking for organizationally. And so what started as a 10-hour a week post-banking career part-time gig turned into, wow, okay, I'm going to use all those lessons learned in life to apply on a bigger scale here at Generous Giving. So not the shortest answer, but I think kind of what you were asking.
Absolutely. And even better than I was hoping in terms of you explaining your heart for generosity, because that's one of the things that we want to unpack here is what is generosity and what does it do to your heart? So we'll talk more about that. So just for those that don't know Generous Giving as an organization, what are some of the things that you do and who is it for?
Sure. You'll hear me obviously speak from a very Christian perspective and reference that we're here to share the biblical message of generosity in order to grow generous givers amongst those entrusted with much. And so that's kind of a tagline. We've got a number of them that try to convey who we are because it seems a little squishy to people, but I love one of our invitations is that, we invite people to experience the freedom, purpose, and joy that's found in a transformed relationship with God and money. And so as a foundation, we're unapologetic that the example of Jesus Christ being a sacrifice for us and for our salvation as believers is this incredible act of generosity that as Christians and Christ followers, if we believe and trust that that's true, that ought to have a very transformational impact on how we show up in life, what we do, and really what we do with the resources that we've been given. So it's really calling people into what it looks like to live in response to that generous gift. And a lot of implications come out of that. And the way we do that, we have several environments. We have an annual conference that brings folks together to kind of celebrate what certain people are doing in their own lives in response to that. We also have some shorter experiences, even on Zoom or in person, where we gather people together to hear stories of how this message has maybe impacted and changed people's lives, the way that they now live with maybe more freedom and purpose because they're more rightly aligned with the resources that they've been entrusted or earned and maybe accumulated or in the process of accumulating. It's a mind shift, a mindset change that impacts how, do I have my stuff or does my stuff have me? And if I have stuff, is it mine or is it actually available for use for God's kingdom? So it's a pretty compelling message right in the middle of, a worldview that's very focused on independence and control and accumulation and power and money. So it's really exciting to see when we call people into that, to see how their lives pivot pretty dramatically in some cases in the pursuit of ultimate, purpose. A lot of folks come and find out that the desire for purpose has come from things that are maybe tangibly celebrated on this earth, but ultimately don't bring that purpose and joy they were looking for.
Well, you bring up a good point about the purpose and joy. This isn't just about having money and so forth. It's really about a heart transformation that is happening and that gets to happen. And yes, this world is in many ways, very materialistic and focused on these things. And I always think about the joke about the U-Haul behind, there's no U-Haul, behind the hearse. And there was another joke there was a guy that was really stingy, wealthy man, married, really stingy, didn't want to spend money. And he dies and his wife, they're going through the will and so forth. And in his will, he says, I want to be buried with my money. And so his wife says, okay. So, if you've been married for like 50 years or whatever, and now you want to be buried with your money. Sure. So she writes a check, drops it in the coffin and goes, there you go.
Yeah,
So try to cash
yeah,
that.
it's
You're not going to be able to cash that in
yeah,
heaven. It's just not going to work. So
no. But
it's just crazy
we're
though.
saturated. Yeah, we're saturated with scorecard. What your scorecard should be. And if you ask most people on the average journey through life, they're gonna a lot of satisfaction and contentment is going to be said to be found in accumulation and security, and many of those things. It's really an acknowledgement that God asks us to look to Him for that contentment, and there's a lot of freedom and joy in coming to that right relationship with Him that allows us to then set a lot more things in motion if we do have resources that giving to others becomes actually a greater source of joy than hoarding or accumulating or hitting some goal. My pastor makes a statement that's really kind of interesting. It sounds offensive at first, but it says, wealthy people are better off than poor because while the person who is poor thinks that money will make everything better, the wealthy person knows that that's not true. I know a lot of wealthy people. I know a lot of people across the whole spectrum, and wealth accumulation is rarely correlated directly to peace, joy, happiness, contentment. In fact, in a lot of situations, people on that journey or who have achieved previously set goals that were meant to bring out this euphoric, purpose, joyful state find themselves in depression and anxiety and lack of purpose, and so you just know, it's like, wow, I've achieved that, but there wasn't the fulfillment that I thought would be there. That's because we're just not wired to find fulfillment that way. And this message of generosity is a really powerful transformational key that unlocks a lot of very unexpected joy and purpose in people's lives. So it's very fun to watch and get a front row seat to that.
Yeah, I can imagine. There's a lady that I had on my show earlier this year. She may be familiar with your organization already. I didn't ask her, but Wendy Steele, she has a company or an organization, I should say, called Impact 100. And so they have women that give $1,000 each, and 100 women gather. And so then they can give away these grants for 100,000 and more. And so she's very interested in this whole idea of generosity, and they've given away $80 million around the world now, and just really, really great. All of it goes through. It's like, it's fully passed through to the charities that it goes to. And she made a comment, and she said that in some of the studies that they had done, research, is that generosity in our body actually releases oxytocin. In oxytocin, so it makes us, it's the feel-good hormone versus the cortisol, which is the stress hormone. So it's actually good for our bodies. And I'm just so amazed when I hear things like that. It's like how God designed us to be generous. And when we're not generous and when we're stingy, and I've known this for myself too, the times when I felt very scarce, and so I didn't feel like I had it in me to be generous, that I felt more scarce and I felt worse than before, and it compounded itself and that can happen at any level. That's, certainly, like you talk about people that are wealthy that don't find joy and actually find the opposite. I know there's probably some people listening and saying, try me, I'd like to have that opportunity.
Yeah.
But the reality is that true wealth doesn't come from how much is sitting in a bank account. And so I'd love to hear some stories, some examples, because we're talking about hypothetics in a sense, or generalities. I'd love to hear some stories that you can share of some examples, let's say like a business owner and I've seen when I did the gathering with Evan a few years back, I remember some stories that stood out in my mind about people that got this heart for generosity that you inspired, ignited it through what they were learning through your programs, and how that transformed their business and how they approached their business, and capitalism, how they looked at it differently.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about that and maybe
Yeah.
share a couple of stories?
Yeah. It's been really neat for me coming into this, I'll call it the generosity space. I mean, there's so much truth to it that there's other people and organizations that are helping people even come to see a better realization of this gift and the ability to participate. But you mentioned someone who's older in age or approaching death. We've had some examples lately where some folks, we'll just say up in their years, have attended even some of our online events. And one of the things that we do is show testimonial videos of people who have found joy in living radically generous. And so we might have an elderly couple watching a video and seeing, and it's almost like they're coming to this realization that, man, another lake house or another property or achieving, you can see on their face coming to realize that what they've been missing is maybe purposefully making those resources available to solve someone else's need, and almost a regret or what have you. And we've had a number of stories here recently where after one of our experiences, someone would say, you know what, it was so clear to me that I've been treating my investments wrong. I just had COVID and the stock market just took away, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars of this nest egg and this security blanket. I'm not going to let the stock market remove my ability to use that to create joy for other people. And so I'm going to go ahead, and we've had people say, hey, I'm not going to hoard this for myself and for some future state that I'm realizing my time on this earth is coming short. I want to use these funds to make, to bring joy or to unlock, to solve some other problem, to whatever it is that God's putting on my heart. And so we've had another number of people take action with things that they have savings or a guest house or things that they've accumulated, and be willing to say, hey, I need to monetize that and bless someone else, put something else in motion. You mentioned businesses. We've had a number of people who, because of some of the tax advantages that occur in the marketplace, they might contact an organization like the National Christian Foundation that helps them structure their business in such a way that, you know what, I want some of my profits to be dedicated towards not just philanthropy, but maybe some Christ-centered biblical generosity and create some initiatives that solve wealth and hunger in my community. And I'm going to dedicate a portion of either the ownership of my business or the profits that I have. And yeah, there's tax advantages to that. There's lots of things to navigate. And so there's people that are skilled and equipped in that. That's not something that we do. We spend our time on the heart change, helping people hopefully unlock and come to realize that they might be looking at the scorecard incorrectly. And then we might, there might be an introduction to these other people that help them tangibly structure things in a way. Or we have a number of folks that get concerned about the generational transfer. Like, I've accumulated XYZ through a lot of hard work and effort. And now that I have this realization that didn't bring it about, man, how am I a good steward of all these resources to pass to another generation? And so there's whole groups and organizations that can help people work through that and not save the blessing for some security event down the road, but let's go ahead and release those funds today to make some good things happen. And then, like you said, it's almost like a selfish endeavor because you get so much joy today seeing things get set in motion. So that's just a few examples. I try not to give away too many of our testimonial stories, because my hope would be that, people would say, ooh, what is that? I want to experience that. And they go to, our website, generousgiving.org, and say, what is that journey of generosity? Let me sign up for one. Let me go see that testimonial video and maybe work through some of those scriptures and events. And that would be the best way for people to meet some of our greatest testimonials of people who now live a transformed life.
Yes, absolutely. And Yeah, there was one story, which, yes, we want them to experience it for themselves. There was, actually, it brings up a point. I did want to mention this, and just to clarify for those listening, you are not a charitable organization where you are actually collecting the donations. So which I like,
Right.
because you're not
Yeah.
actually, otherwise there's a bit of a conflict of interest, like
Yes.
become more
Yeah. No.
generous and send us your money. No, you don't actually collect
People
that. Yeah.
people often, yeah, they hear the name generous giving and they're like, oh, you're a fundraising entity, or when are you going to ask me for money? Oh, I'll come to one of your events, or can I just write you a check? It's like, no, hey, there. When this all began, there was a foundation that basically said, we believe it would be a generous thing for us to essentially underwrite the budget so that you might go help others unlock the resources that are otherwise being stored and grown. And so our budget is underwritten by folks that felt that was important to do. And now we pursue that and spread that message. And if you come to one of our events, we're not going to ask you for money. You can't give it to us. And so that, you're right, that allows us to really focus. Most people don't believe it's true. They keep waiting for the ask, and, well, are you going to ask me for money? It's like, no, this is about you examining your heart. And we want to create a space where that is most likely to happen. And it's most likely to happen if it's not followed by an ask for money, especially those that do have resources. They often get asked a lot. And you can spend a lot of time wondering with skepticism and trying to measure results. That's not what we're about. And so we're super grateful that folks felt it was important enough to preserve that environment. It really does let us focus on the heart transformation.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and so there are some barriers to generosity. You alluded to one, even just the idea that people that are wealthy actually get asked a lot, and so they get hit up a lot to it's true. And there are some other barriers to it. We talked a little bit about the perception what the world you know deems as being valuable and how we're seen and so forth. Can you talk a little bit about some of the other common barriers that you've noticed to just people being more generous? I mean, it's one thing when you don't have anything and you're like, hey, okay, let's help each other out so we get through this difficult time. But when you're at a point where you are resourced, right, then there's less of that need to do that. And then I notice, like with some of my clients, is like when they have nothing to lose, they're willing to risk it, right? They're willing to put it all on the line because they've got nothing to lose. What's the worst thing that can happen, right? But when they are successful, then they've got something to lose. And now it changes it. Now that rather than playing to win, they start playing not to lose.
Yeah, there are so many attitudes. Like, so I have to use my own journey, like I said, that had to do with comparison. For me personally, comparison has been a part of my whole life. And so even if I would verbalize to you, oh, I don't really compare myself to others, and therefore that feeds a mentality of I need to accumulate more to feel good about the fact is I can say that all day long, but our culture permeates so many things. So the resistance it naturally comes from 80 directions. As a believer in Jesus, as a believer in Christ, and that we have a creator, I also believe there's an enemy, and his tools are abundant. They're all around us to say, social media comparison and all of these things. If I had a little bit more, almost everyone in America is wealthy on a global scale. But you ask most Americans, even who have attained what a lot of folks would say is wealth, they would say, no, I'm not, a little bit more. And so there's so many different underlying attitudes that are fed into our consumeristic society, and then that they just becomes tools and voices. It doesn't take a lot for barriers of giving to come up. Well, just if I had just a little bit more in the bank or security. And that's why we say is it really is a heart issue. There's 1,000 different reasons. There's new cars to buy. There's stimulate the economy. There's, I've got to put enough away. I have 4 children. They're all girls. So I've got college and weddings and things. I mean, if I just want to think about comparison, all I have to do is look a little bit further on the horizon, and I don't have enough. Well, it's all rooted in, honestly, the trust that I have in my Creator to provide what I need and at the level I need, and not be duped into some of those things that I can fall into. So the boundaries, I named a few, but there's just a lot. It's all around us. It's all around us, and it competes. Like I said, the enemy uses that to compete against the truth of God's, identity for us found in Him, not in things.
Yeah, I love in the Bible where there are the different examples of how Jesus just demonstrated abundance, that there's so much that you don't have to worry. And I think a lot of the barriers and fears that we have, even comparison, is, it's all rooted in this scarcity and this fear that we may not be enough or have enough. We may not do enough, right? It's all of this, we need more to be enough conversation. And when Jesus is like, well, Peter came and said, well, we need to pay this tax, right? It's like, oh, well, go fishing and open up the mouth of the fish and there'll be a coin and it'll pay for both of us. Or, feeding with a few, what do we have? We only have a few loaves of bread and some fish, and they're going to feed, and he fed, thousands of people, and different stories about turning water into wine and all of these examples. And like you said, even just the example of his own sacrifice. And it's just so many ways that it's like we realize, and this is, for me, my experience has just been, wow, when I was in that scarce place and I bought into the story that I was lacking something, and like you said, the enemy, telling me that that's what was happening, and I bought into that, then I found myself hoarding. I found myself holding on, because what if there's not enough next week? What if I have to hold on to what I have? And yet, when I began to be more generous, then what actually that did is also not just unlock the resources that I had, but it actually became a multiplier. Like God is a God of multiplication. Yes. And so He's not a God of division. So He's a God of multiplication. So it was like, wow, the more I give, and there's that saying, right? You can't outgive God. The more I give, the more I actually receive. And it creates this. So talk a little bit about your experience with that, because on the other side, okay, we can talk about barriers. We can talk about why it's important. We can talk about that, why it's important for us, and in terms of a heart transformation, but even from a benefit standpoint of, wow, when you are generous, it just unlocks this abundance that is just, it benefits everybody.
Yeah. It's so fun to see. And it's one of the reasons, quite frankly, people, when they come to one of our environments, whether it's our annual conference and they hear stories, or they come to one of our journeys of generosity, a jog, whether that's in person or online, everyone brings this baggage, these distracted views of where joy and identity come from. And through, ultimately, the gospel-centered message of generosity, it's at the heart of so many things for people, because you hit the pocketbook and it's like, oh man. And that generosity, a lot of our testimonies are from people that they come back year after year to hear some of these same stories, because it's this energy boost, and it's this reminder. And then they go participate in something where they've used this resource that they have to unlock something else. And it brings about a joy that surpasses understanding. Does that sound, you hear these biblical references, but it is truly transformational, and it's rooted in the heart. And we shouldn't be that surprised, because look at our Creator and look at what He did. And so even as myself, just in the past months of, joining the organization part-time and coming into a full-time, is just the examples become endless, that when you study giving and generosity, it's woven into God's view of money and heart. And so I'm less and less, I'm not surprised anymore when I see the reaction of people, and it's like having a front row seat to an awakening for people, if that makes sense. And so I don't know if that answered your question. Again, it's like I want to say just enough for people to come and experience something that you can really only experience. Generous giving was founded originally by four gentlemen that were poised to embark on life. They're very well equipped and ready, and noticing that affluence had really grown in the United States, but giving had not. And so they gathered people who were living radically generous lives. And it was, how amazing, just bringing those people together and having a conversation about it sparked even bigger generosity. And then inviting some other people into those conversations, just literally, it's one of those things where I can't even explain it, but when we get together and we talk about it and it grows, and I go participate, and I come back and I want to share that joy with other people, it just becomes an undeniable experience. So we have a growing, almost like grassroots effort of volunteers and people in proximity, are champions, that it just perpetuates in their life, and you can't stop feeding it. And it becomes undeniable. It's like, okay, this is the way God wired us to experience joy. And even just recently, we had a champion of many years who's been very active in I'll say, replicating this message. It passed away, horrible circumstances. And the celebration of life at his funeral was something that most people could not even explain, because of this heart shift and pivot, and what he ultimately spent his remaining years of his life investing in, and being generous with the way he ran his business, the way he solved needs in his community and his friendships. And, in the midst of COVID, thousands of people to gather around a changed, transformed life. You're like, wow, I hear story after story about people who have accumulated much, and there's not many people coming to celebrate what the life's work was. And we regularly see life being celebrated because of what generosity opened up. And that attracts me. That's what I want. I want my life to matter. I want to live with purpose, and generosity is a perfect lane for that to happen. It's a picture of God's love for us.
Absolutely. Yeah. And generosity is near and dear to my heart, because it's near and dear to God's heart. And I seek to be more like him, and to understand him more, and to have more of that heart myself. It's also, it's with that, it's interesting, because when I look at the world and everybody's like trying to be, have more and all this, they all want the abundant life. And it occurred to me one day that everybody's trying to get to the abundant life through scarcity. Like, if I get more clients for myself, if I hold on to more, if I save more. Now, it's not to say that you don't want to save. You want to be prudent and good steward. Good steward is also being wise with it, but it's not hoarding. It's not just like, oh, I want it me and my own. It's being a good steward. I love what James Lenhoff, who's also on my podcast, and he is well familiar with GG, and he talks about the fact that I don't actually own it all. I don't see it as it's mine. I am storing it for a season while I'm on earth. And but yeah, this idea of everybody's trying to get abundance, whether they're Christian or not, they're all trying to get to this point of abundance in their life, and yet they're doing it through scarcity. And that's not just money. That's time, that's encouragement, acknowledgement, gratitude, all those things. But then that's the heart transformation that happens. But money is that one that tends to be like, oh, I'll give time, I'll give talents, but you want my money. Ooh, now it's close to our heart. And because there's
you used the word stingy earlier. I knew, and we all know that is, who do we prefer to be around? Someone who's they make you very aware. I think it's become fairly normal for us to make others aware of when we are allowing them into, to use our things or what have you, build walls. And just describing it that way, you can see it's not this freedom, it's not this joy. And then I have other friends with the same amount of assets and resources, but they live in such a way that it's not theirs. They're making it available to the community around them. And you're like, oh, there's so much more life giving to this. And, but it's one of those things that most people, quite frankly, they may not believe, or they'll be skeptical of it until they experience it themselves. And that's really at the heart of what we do, is help people experience it by watching others and then inviting into, okay, what would God have you do? How might God be calling you to live differently? And go try that and just see what happens. Well, regularly, those people come back and become champions for this movement, because they see and experience the joy, and they want to participate at that, unlocking that in other people's lives. So that pretty much describes why I'm delighted to be here and a part of the organization, to make that as effective as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I believe that the transformation that needs to happen in the world starts with generosity for that very reason. And there's like this, when I was talking about how God multiplies, right? There's a supernatural multiplication that happens. You can't even explain it, how it all works, but it's amazing how it multiplies, and there's more than enough for everyone and what is needed. So talk about, as we wrap up here, how people can participate. Because I know that as you started as a CEO during COVID, and so you had to pivot because your events were live and that's not available right now. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about that change and how people can participate.
Sure. 20 years, we're a very relational organization, and that because these are sensitive subjects for people, and you can't just say, hey, trust me, to someone you don't know. So we've spent a lot of years building relationships and creating environments where people can be free to lower their guard, and pivoting online was difficult because we're so relational. But this environment that we're in, people are much more receptive to trying that. There might be a little bit of Zoom fatigue and things going on that can make it a challenge, but people are a little more receptive to that. And what we found is done well and in the right increments, those stories and that curriculum and things that we walk people through is nearly as effective, but it's certainly much more scalable. So we have some energies and efforts towards continuing to do that. We're also delighted at the opportunities to reconvene in person when that comes available. A lot of our folks, that's what they experienced and know. But we have other things, just continuing to create content that and digest content in ways that that people are more accustomed to today. So we're going to continue that. But people can go to our website, generousgiving.org, and they can literally navigate to a virtual tab and sign up for an open online jog. And that's about 4.5 hours of experience that we have that walks you through this. And most people, if they come with some skepticism about that time investment, usually at the end, they're like, wow, that was awesome. And, but what we find is that typically someone who loves a message and wants to be a part, it's more effective if they invite the people that they know to join and experience. It's like most things else. Is like, I can just send you to the event, or why don't you join me? And that's really our preferred method, is that we equip people that become volunteers with us to share that message and build the community of generosity around them. And so that's our hope, and we're building experiences to continue doing that. You can go and start your own, and then bring even our experiences into your organization or your community group, your church, whatever, whatever areas that you have, to be able to generously use even your relational capital. There's so many different resources that God has given us, and it's not all just financial. And so we ask people to use all that they are in a generous way, and then invite others into that experience. So love to have you join us again.
Yes, absolutely. I think I'm due for a refresher for sure. It's been a few
Yeah.
years. Well,
Wonderful. It's like a boost.
Yes, exactly. Like you were saying about some of the stories and the testimonials of people and what they've done, just amazing stories of how people have demonstrated generosity and the impact of that generosity and the impact on others, but also on themselves and on their business.
Yes.
And the blessing that
it's such a timely message right now, because that scarcity mindset is really flaring up. It's like, I don't know how much runway I have to survive this pandemic environment. And, it's such a timely message to call us into, okay, what would God have me do? Who do I trust ultimately for my provision? What are the differences between my needs and wants, and what can I make available? It's a really important conversation to be having, even in the midst of all that's going on right now. So it's very timely, and we're excited to be right in the middle of it.
Yes, absolutely. And I was just thinking about, because we've got an election coming up, this is coming up soon. And I was thinking about, just imagining what if that was, I know that's relevant, but in terms of the quality of life, and what if we, rather than relying on government to determine our welfare, that we would actually take that on ourselves in communities and as a nation, through generosity, supporting each other, creating a culture of generosity. And that's what I'm really passionate about, is that, as you are, of course, is creating that culture of generosity, because it would trump, no pun intended, but it would actually, I just realized, I'm like, it would trump the whatever else is going on, because in the midst of all of that, I believe that God is on the throne, and he is sovereign. And so, Amen. That generosity that we can share with each other, in no matter what's happening in Washington, will determine the quality of our life ultimately. So, yes. Yeah. Troy, thank you so much. I appreciate you being here. And again, for our listeners, go to generousgiving.org. We'll make sure that's in the show notes, as well as, of course, if you want to share this with your friends, you'll be able to do that. There'll be the highlights of what we've talked about here. So if you want to review it, this may be one of those episodes that you want to review again and again. Just, allow it to work in your heart, and to create some curiosity to go and to be part of a journey of generosity, one of their gatherings, and ultimately to facilitate it. I really love the fact that they are not asking for money, that they are just saying, here, we want to share with you. This is not about getting your money. This is about getting to the heart of it, and having that freedom that generosity offers. So we encourage you to that. We'd love to hear your stories. You can find us on leadersoftransformation.com, of course, on social as well. Love to hear how this has impacted you. If you have questions or comments, we'd love to hear that as well as how you are making an impact in the world, how you're being a leader of transformation, or how you are planning to be a leader of transformation, how we can support you in that journey. So reach out to us. Again, we appreciate you being here, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode of Leaders of Transformation real soon.